Hello and good morning or good evening or from wherever you are watching us today to Live 2021 Nephrology Campus with the topic Current Trends in Nephrology. My name is Christoph Wanner. I'm a professor of medicine at the University Hospital here in Wuerzburg, and I'm chairing the Live 2021 Nephrology Campus together with Professor Peter Stenwinkel from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. So you, as the participants, you are muted all the time, but you can ask questions in the chat function. And I think the button for the chat function should be on the right bottom corner. So tonight we have two distinguished professors here to lecture for us at the webinar number 8, the last one in the year 2020. And more are to follow next year. So with us is Professor Dr. Norbert Lameire. He is Professor of Medicine at the University of Ghent in Belgium. He was a former chief of the division or department of nephrology at the university, and he was editor-in-chief of nephrology, dialysis and transplantation of the ERA EDTA. And with us also is Dr. Hakan Hedman. He is president of the Swedish Kidney Association and chairman of the Swedish Kidney Foundation. And also he is honorary doctor of medicine at the Gothenburg University. So tonight our topic is expanding the patient's voice in nephrology. And I ask our first lecturer, Professor Norbert Lameire. Please, Norbert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening or good morning to everybody listening to us. Hello, Professor Wanner, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and a special salute to my co-speaker, Dr. Hedman. I'm looking forward to his magnificent talk. The topic of this seminar is expanding the patient's voice in nephrology with patient outcome measures. And I think I could not have a better introduction to this symposium than by quoting Sir William Osler. William Osler, some of you may know the name, was the founder of the Johns Hopkins University Medical School and was later the Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford. And he wrote already in the early 20th century that the good physician treats the disease, but the great physician treats the patient. I will try to have my next slide. Expanding the voice, patient's voice in nephrology with patient-reported outcomes needs a little bit of explanation that as patient-oriented care has expanded in healthcare, the use of patient-reported outcomes to evaluate patients' health has increased as well. And patient-reported outcomes complement the more traditional and biologically based clinical measures of patients' health by adding information about the patient's perceptions of their own health. For example, these outcomes measure health-related quality of life and look into how the patient feels, the patient's well-being, and what they can do, the patient's functionality. Patient-centered care has been defined by the Institute of Medicine already some years ago. And the definition is that it means providing care that is respectful of and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs and values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decisions. Of course, shared decision-making requires 4 essential characteristics. The first one, that both the patient and the doctor, and possibly others involved in his care, including the patient's relatives, take part in the treatment decision-making. 2, there should be a two-way flow of information between the clinician and patient, and not only a unidirectional flow from clinician to patient. 3, that both the clinician and the patient express treatment preferences. And 4, that a treatment decision is made when both the clinician and the patient agree on the most appropriate treatment. As a matter of fact, what does it mean? It takes at least two to tango. I'm sure you are all aware about the SONG initiative, and the SONG initiative is abbreviation for the Standardized Outcomes in Nephrology. An initiative aims to establish a set of core outcomes and outcome measures across the spectrum of kidney disease for trials and other forms of research. These outcomes are developed based on the shared priorities of the patients, the caregivers, the clinicians, including the nurses and the technicians, researchers, policymakers, and relevant stakeholders. And some of you may know and have acquaintance with several of these current core outcomes that have been developed by SONG in hemodialysis, in transplantation and peritoneal dialysis, in children and adolescents, in glomerular diseases, chronic kidney disease not yet, including patients not yet on dialysis, and polycystic kidney disease. The SONG methodology, I have to explain that very shortly how they work. For establishing these outcomes in nephrology, they go through 5 phases. The first phase starts, very importantly, with a systematic review to identify the outcomes that have been reported. Phase 2 is then a nominal group technique with patients and caregivers to identify and rank and describe the reasons for the outcomes. The phase 3 is stakeholder interviews with patients, caregivers, clinicians, researchers, and policymakers to elicit the values and the perspectives. Phase 4 is probably the most important one because it includes a Delphi survey to distill and generate a prioritized list of core outcomes based on consensus. And the word important here is consensus. And then the last 5, of course, is then a consensus workshop to review and to endorse the core outcomes and discuss the implementation and the strategies. SONG classifies the outcomes in 3 tiers. The first tier is the core outcome, the outer core, and then the third tier, the research agenda. A core outcome set is an agreed standardized set of outcomes that should be measured and reported as a minimum, and that should appear as endpoints in all the clinical trials in specific areas of the healthcare. But of course, later on, researchers or more specialized people can add some other outcomes in the core outcome set. For example, the core outcome in hemodialysis gives an absolute priority of critical importance to both stakeholder groups and should be included in all trials. I give you an example here of the SONG hemodialysis outcome. In the absolute priority core outcomes, of course, the nephrologist brought in as very important outcomes the cardiovascular disease, vascular access, mortality, of course, but then a little bit surprising for the patients, another extremely important core outcome is fatigue. Fatigue includes then, if you then go to the second layer, includes also the ability to travel, the ability to work, the impact of being on dialysis on family and friends, on the mobility of the patient, and then, of course, this famous feeling of washed out after each dialysis session. Everybody with experience with dialysis patients knows that they often say, "Doctor, I feel best the days that I am not on dialysis because right after the dialysis sessions, I'm only good to go to bed and sleep for a couple of hours." And then, of course, in the third layer, you'll find then all kind of like anxiety and stresses and many others which are important, but are more research outcomes than actually of very importance to the patient. A very important, as I said, very important standardized outcome is fatigue. And the SONG hemodialysis fatigue measure, which has been recently published, I must say, this month in Clinical Journal of the American Society, consists of 3 items that actually assess, 1, the effect of the fatigue on the life participation, 2, on tiredness, and 3 on the level of energy. And these dimensions are then assessed on a 4-point Likert scale, indicating increasing severity and ranging from 0, when there is absolutely no complaint, to 3, when there are severe complaints in the area of fatigue. The patients respond then on the basis of their experience with fatigue in the past week. So it's an overall 1-week interrogation. And then an overall score for fatigue is obtained in a scale ranging from 0, when there's absolutely no fatigue, to 9, which is the maximum score. And this score has been recently tested in comparison with other quality of life measures and was simple and very efficient. Just to illustrate is the ranking of importance of outcomes in hemodialysis. From the patient caregiver view, caregiver stands here for the family or anybody helping the patient directly at home, and from the health of view of the point of view of the health professional. For patient caregiver, the ability to travel, the amount of dialysis free time, the parameters of dialysis adequacy, and the dealing with this washout phenomenon after dialysis were very, very important. On the contrary, or opposite, is from the health professional view, of course, mortality, the duration and the number of recurrent hospitalizations, the result on the blood pressure and avoiding particularly the hypotensive attacks, and then, of course, the complications of vascular access. Just for your interest, I also give you the standardized core outcomes as were delineated by talking to kidney transplant patients. And for kidney transplant patients, an absolute core outcome is, of course, the health and the status of the graft, besides the fear for cancer, the fear for cardiovascular disease, of course, the fear for infections, the allowance of a successful transplant to participate fully in full life, and then, of course, also mortality. And then in the second layer, the ability to work, but again, you see appear fatigue and many other complaints that were very important to the patients. Important also in these modern times is that there can be also, based on these SONG results and other investigations, developed a technology roadmap for innovative approaches to kidney replacement therapies. And this may be interesting for industries in dialysis, that if they develop new techniques for renal replacement therapy, they should take into account these patient-focused goals. And all, if you summarize them, are meant to decrease the time on dialysis, to reduce the restrictions on diet and fluid intake, to alleviate several known symptoms associated with dialysis, like sleep disturbances, depression, fatigue again, weakness, and then to improve the blood pressure control, to improve the ability to work, the ability to travel, and then, of course, better, maybe even better treatments than today for anemia and for bone disease. Not only for during the treatment and during the development of new innovative techniques, also patients demand more and more to become engaged throughout research. And this going from the preconception of a research protocol, whereby the research gap should be identified, the priorities should be set, and also should be looked at decisions for funding, all the way up to the last point above in the slide, dissemination, going from study design, study conduct, analysis, and then finally to the translation of the knowledge acquired by the research to all the end users, and to looking for implementation methods of result in clinical practice. All these steps, the patient asked to be involved in developing trials and protocols. Of course, one of the major problems today, but not only today, they stay already there for many, many years, are barriers to effective communication between patients with chronic kidney disease and their healthcare providers. I've put here between veterans with chronic disease because this study was taken from a study done in veteran administration hospitals. And in blue are mentioned the 4 items that compose these barriers. First of all, the patient's perceived role as the listener. And then in black, I find two quotes, direct expressions from patients during the interviews. For example, I don't usually ask my doctor about CKD. The doctor brings it up himself, showing to a very passive role of some patients in their relationship with the healthcare provider. Then the patient's limited CKD knowledge. I didn't know that CKD could cause bone disease. You're telling me no. And that was the expression of a patient in CKD, not yet on dialysis, but in stage 5. And then the major complaint is, I do not understand the explanation of the physician. They say you have end-stage renal disease. Now, end-stage, I thought that I had 1 more month to live. I didn't even know what renal was. So the word renal was unknown and is now under impulse also of the KDIGO association, tendency to be replaced by the word kidney, because kidney is easier to understand than renal. And then the doctor talks to me like I'm a 6-year-old. And what question can I ask if I even don't know what they are saying? And that was the expression from a kidney transplant recipient. And then overall, there was sometimes a dissatisfaction with the patient-provider relationship. There was no sit-down talk. I don't know if the doctors diagnosed my CKD or what the tests showed. And then coming from a patient with an urological problem, and this is a very common problem when you are in the hands of specialists, I have several doctors. I have my urologist, I have my family doctor, and I have my nephrologist because I'm on dialysis. And none of them seem to talk to each other. Indeed, I believe that an important barrier to effective communication between kidney patients and their medical team is related to an overall quite low health literacy in the patient population with kidney disease. The American Medical Association has defined health literacy as the degree to which individuals have the capacity to obtain and to process and understand basic health information that is needed to make appropriate health decisions. Professor Van Older, my colleague, and I were asked recently to write an editorial commentary to a systematic review that was published, or that is in press, in NDT, and exploring the interrelationships between low health literacy in patients on CKD, not yet on dialysis, and trying to find the relations with bad outcomes in these patients, and eventually to try to define interventions to improve their outcomes. It was found that overall, the health literacy, the knowledge of the pathology that they have of the CKD patients was rather low. And the only strong evidence that was found for an association of this health literacy with outcomes was that there was a relation with smoking, which is a well-known association, but also a suboptimal transplant process, meaning a lower likelihood of being waitlisted for transplantation or referral to patients. And on this slide is summarized, this is my last slide, a combination that we try to put on paper between the low health literacy in nephrology, which is influenced, of course, under the impact of unfavorable socioeconomic conditions and in a lower general education. But then the most important consequences of low health literacy in nephrology in the CKD patient is leading or its association with lower medical and therapeutic adherence, with faster progression of kidney failure, with more cardiovascular complications. For the dialysis patients, again, lower medical and therapeutic adherence, more uncontrolled hypervolemia, and less home and self-care dialysis. And then for the transplant patient, again, lower medical and therapeutic adherence, but as important consequences, these people with low health literacy are less waitlisted, they are less interested or are less registered on a waiting list, they have less preemptive of living donation. So I think as overall conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, that I think that besides the willingness and the skills of the medical team, the efficacy of the communication depends to a large extent on the health literacy of the nephrology patient. there is an obvious need to include this aspect in the medical curricula and the bedside teaching of the skills of medical students and nephrology fellows. And in general, I think this topic of low health literacy deserves more interest among nephrology clinicians, renal educators, policymakers, and other stakeholders. I thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Norbert, for your interesting talk. I think your lecture had contents we rarely heard in our conferences, and they are so important for daily care. And thank you especially for your kidney-centered, focused language, which is important for kidney health today. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may have already questions to Professor Lameire, but I want to encourage you to use the chat function. Please write your questions in the chat function, and we will discuss it at the end together with the talk and the lecture of Professor and Dr. Hakan Hedman. So he has personal experience about expanding the patient voice, and I will now hand over to Dr. Hedman to give his personal experience. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you for the very interesting presentation, Professor Lameire. It was very interesting to listen to you. First, I would like to say I'm very proud to be invited, honored to be invited for this webinar. And I'm going to present my personal background and experience as patients, kidney patients, during very long time, 60 years, as well as my opinion, how kidney care needs to be developed from a patient's perspective. There. My long travel as a patient started a long time ago when I was 9 years old. My parents had noticed that I was tired and swollen around the eyes, and therefore they took me to our family doctor. He sent me to hospital where I stayed for 9 months, mostly in bed, and that was how they treated kidney patients during that time at the beginning of the 1660s. I have a picture here from the children's ward where I stayed, and here you can see several children of this photo from 1961. I am the only survivor, except the little girl you can see on the laps on the nurse. All died after diseases that today could be cured by transplantations. The boy you see in the bed, he had a blood cancer, and I know that he died 2-3 months after this photo. And the boy on the bed beside him, he had the same kidney disease as I had, and he died in 1968 after a kidney transplantation. And I am in the middle with the armed cross. I'm 9 years old there. And behind me is a girl. You can see the head. She had a liver disease, and she died also 2-3 months after this photo. And I think today she had a liver transplantation and be alive. But I was lucky, and I could leave hospital after nine months. And thereafter I had regular check-up with my doctor, so I could finish the studies. I finished school, and when I was 25, I had to start dialysis as my kidney failed. And I was on dialysis for 9 months due to I had a lot of antibodies. First, I had hemodialysis at home, and you could see this old machine I had there. And thereafter, I had CAPD after it was introduced in Sweden about 1980. And I had that for 4.5 years. In May 1985, at last a donor was found in Belgium, so I had my transplantation, and I'm very lucky to still have the same kidney with a very good function, and my creatinine is today below 100, so I'm happy for that. And of course, the transplantation had a lot also of positive impacts of my life. I could start training and exercise. I didn't had any exercises before, and so I participated 3 times in World Transplanted Games. And I met my wife, and we got married, and we have a daughter. She's adopted from China. She is now 23 years, and she was very good in school, and we are very proud of her. She's now a Bachelor of Economic. I could also work full time after my transplantation in the paint business with ship paints, and I had also possibilities to travel, make business travels around the world. But I was also say that I'm very also happy that after 45 years to be still alive in renal replacement treatment. How is it to be a kidney recipient? If you are a kidney recipient, you are always a kidney patient. I have always regular checkups with the doctor checkups, and I also know that I can't. I also know everyone knows that they can't keep the kidney for forever. But I have been very lucky. I have had my kidney now for 35 years. I know also that there are medications create some side effects. Unlike other transplant patients, you can, as kidney recipient, always return to dialysis if you lose the organ. That's not possible if you had a liver transplant or heart transplant. A little about side effects. I have also had many other patients in kidney patients had several side effects of the medication, and also of course of my kidney disease. I had some problems with the eyes. I had a cataract operation 1990 due to the cortisone, and I got some heart problems, and I had a heart surgery last summer in July. But today I'm feeling quite well. What is my hope for the future and research? I have many hopes and expectations of the future, and that the research will solve the riddles associated with kidney disease. Above all, that is that the most common kidney disease can be cured in the future due to the research. I hope also that the complications in connections with the kidney disease are eliminated, so that kidney patients could live a long life. And I have also a personal special wish, and that is that cortisone is replaced very soon with another drug that does not cause so many side effects that cortisone does today. Now I will move on to my presentation as a representative of a patient's organization. Kidney disease is a globally growing problem. Knowledge about kidney diseases is low among the populations, decision makers, but also I think about many general practitioners. Kidney disease is also associated with a lot of suffering in those affected. Kidney disease causes high cost to the society. We all know that. What needs to be done to reverse the trend of increased cases of kidney disease? We must start from the beginning. If the growing number of patients with kidney disease is to be able to decrease in the world, more information is needed in society about the importance of early detection and how it's possible to slow down the development of a kidney disease that is detected early. Cooperation between us as a patient representatives and the medical profession is important for successful results. It is important that this happens at both national and international level. And that is what we work for in our umbrella organization, EKPF. I think there are three important measures that we advocate that can contribute to fewer and fewer people becoming seriously kidney sick. First of all, blood pressure check at each doctor's visit, even if the visit refers to a sprained thumb. School health care should pay more attention to kidney disease and perform some urine tests at health checkups. In Sweden, they stopped it several years ago. Now we think they miss young people who have the beginning of kidney diseases. We have seen it several times. I'm now going to talk a little about self-care and the importance of self-care in dialysis. As a patient's representative, we work to ensure that the patient is involved and has influence over their treatment, for example, to manage their dialysis themselves. The diagram here is with statistics from the Swedish Renal Register. It shows that the dialysis in the home has been stagnant for the past 25 years at a very low level. You can see it, the two lines in the bottom of the diagram. This is an issue that we are working on in our organization, the Swedish Kidney Association, together with the medical profession in Sweden, to change this. Changes are required for more patients to manage their dialysis themselves. A change in attitude of healthcare professionals is required. All people have abilities and experiences that are not used in healthcare. The patient must be given early information before the start of dialysis about the possibility of home dialysis. PD should always be a first choice when it's possible. The technology must be developed so the dialysis machines and other equipments are adapted to patients' home. It's not so today. The patient usually receives equipment that has been developed for hospital use. IT technology, if it is used, can give greater opportunities for home dialysis and also increase security and reduce the patient's fear of home dialysis. I will talk about person-centered care, which I think can be a tool in order to increase the number of self-care for the patient and also increase home dialysis. Since 2012, after I was appointed as honorary doctor of medicine in Gothenburg, I have been involved in the steering committee of the Center for Person-Centered Care, GPCC, at the University of Gothenburg. I was invited by Professor Inger Ekman, who was the head of GPCC, to the steering committee. I believe that person-centered care, if it is implemented in the healthcare system, can get more patients involved, and that more patients choose to manage their dialysis themselves and be able to have this decisive influence over their choice of treatment. Person-centered care can help patients better understand the importance of different treatments, such as medications, which especially important after a kidney transplant. I know that there are a lot of research going on today about person-centered care that shows positive health economics effects and increased quality of life of the patients. And my conclusions and the summary of my presentations. Kidney disease is a global growing problem. Kidney disease is unknown of the general public and also as well as politicians. Information is needed on the importance of early detection and prevention. The patient is an underutilized resource. More people can handle their dialysis themselves. Implementation of person-centered care increases patients' participation and reduces costs. The patients' organizations have a broad knowledge and have contributed to the development of renal care and as a spokesperson for kidney patients. And kidney research needs more resources to solve the mystery of the origin and cure of CKD. And at last, I also hope that the vaccine against COVID-19 will solve the most serious problem for kidney patients today. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Hedman, for this really interesting insight into a patient life and all the aspects which are around. So, and thank you both that you are now available for a discussion. And we have a number of questions in the chat function, and I may get the first questions coming forward. And this is, I'm reading it, it's quite long. So it is, what criteria would you consider when choosing the questionnaire to reflect patient's voice? Apparently this is a song. Question to Professor Lameire. What recommendations would you give to nephrologists if they want to implement such initiatives in their clinics?
Yeah, should I try to answer this, Christoph?
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, it's if I understand well this question, because it's quite complex. The questioner asked what nephrologists should do to implement the some recommendations in his practice. Is that what I think the questioner is asking? I don't know. I do not understand very well the question. Maybe you can help me.
Let's turn it around and say, when we get something to implement, a data and a trial, and we want to implement the result of a trial into the practice. What is your experience about funding of such a patient-oriented trial where we can then bring the result into the practice? What is the funding chances of such maybe non-pharmacological interventions today?
Yeah, that's a question right to my heart. Indeed, at first glance, when you try to develop a trial that is not directly industry sponsored, and fortunately, we are so fortunate that industry is sponsoring a lot of good trials, you have also other ways to find sponsorship at more let's say, neutral or national at the international level. And I know, and you know that also, Christoph, at the European level, there are possibilities to ask so-called neutral funding to the European Union. But also here in Belgium, we have by the National Knowledge Center, and I'm part of the jury of this body, practical trials, meaning not sponsored by industry, and on topics that where industry probably will not be directly interested in, but may be of extreme importance to patients. And it's interesting when we evaluate protocols submitted to this knowledge center, the members of the jury are important, and these are patients also. And even the scientific part of the protocol is discussed among experts and the statisticians, but the patient has the last word. If he thinks or they think that the protocol is not enough patient-oriented or not taking care of the side effects and the direct implications of the trial to their health, then the chance that such a trial will be approved is very rare. So you can indeed ask for funding outside industry to fund such trials. And I think in every country there must be ways for doing that. But you can certainly do it on the European level.
Maybe I can use this question also to ask to Dr. Hedman, when you have seen how diverging are the wishes of the patients, quality of life, travels, no fatigue, and the perspectives of the doctor. So what is your experience? I think you may agree, but when it comes to problems, to complications, are then not doctors and patients again moved together and to the same result, improving infections, outcomes, and also mortality? What do you think, Dr. Hedman?
Yeah, I agree what Professor Lameire said. I think it's very important that patients also are involved in the treatment and also in research, as you said, and I think many research projects could be from initiative from patients. And I think also many patients could be involved in the research projects.
May I add something to that, Christoph? To this remark?
Please.
Yeah. I would absolutely avoid the potential conflict that was generated by my talk or by Dr. Hedman's talk in seeing the doctors and the patient as opposite to each other. This is, of course, not the purpose. And when it comes down to the strict medical and the scientific approach to a problem, to a disease, or to a complication, of course, the doctor should take the initiative. But I think he should try to explain in understandable words what he is doing and why he is doing it, and not as a deus ex machina decide everything without giving the necessary explanations. That is the purpose of collaboration. Doctors and patients are not enemies of each other. On the contrary.
I agree fully with you.
So then I need the next questions. We have some more in the chat, and it's also a question to both of you, and I'm reading it. In view of the upcoming COVID-19 vaccine, how would you propose that governments give priority to CKD patients? I know this, for example, I know from the president of the German Society who has written to the ministry, don't forget the dialysis patients, that they are on the high priority list to be vaccinated. So initiative. So how would you propose that governments give priority do we need to write to in every country, or what? And maybe to Dr. Hedman, what is the Swedish initiative in the moment doing? Do you know something? What the priority of CKD, dialysis, and transplant patients are?
Okay. We have right now sent a letter to the authorities, and that the kidney patients and the dialysis patients should be priority number 1 at the first group who get the vaccine. Also the transplant patients, kidney transplant patients, as we have seen that many dialysis patients who got COVID-19 during the springtime died. I think it was of the hemodialysis patients, 23% of the dialysis patients died due to COVID-19. And
That's
14%
right. The ERA EDTA,
yes.
yeah. The ERA
Yeah,
EDTA registry has done a survey in Europe, and they have collected 4,000 dialysis patients, and they have a mortality of 20%, 23%.
It's obvious, Christoph, that kidney patients in general, whatever, even in CKD, serious CKD, and on dialysis and transplanted, are in the high-risk group. In Belgium, the first choice for distributing the vaccines are to the elderly care centers, because there these people live in a close community. And of course, we have seen that many of the outbreaks of COVID-19 happened there with a tremendous mortality and with all the consequences of psychological repercussions and so on. So they will probably be the first to be vaccinated. But then in the second wave, and it will be 1 or 2 months later, the high-risk patients will be there, the diabetics, above 80 years old, so I will be part of it. And then, of course, also the kidney patients. So there is no reason why kidney patients should be forgotten. On the contrary. And I think, again, that at each national level, but also at the European level, the kidney organizations should draw attention to their existence.
Yeah.
That of course, there's also one medical caveat. We do not know yet whether the vaccination is so efficient. As we recall, the hepatitis B virus vaccination had to be done a third, a fourth time, because it was not so efficient. This can happen also with COVID-19. We do not know it yet, but we need to study, observe this. And there is the ERA CODA working group within the ERA EDTA, and this group is collecting specifically these data. So very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I need the next question, please. And it's also a long one, so I read it again. In some countries, research grants require patient and public involvement. While this is true for public-funded studies, it is not for commercial studies. Considering their multi-center design, how do we address this?
I think
maybe
probably
Norbert,
this was first to me. So if I understand well the question, indeed, in public-funded research protocols, as I explained earlier, patients should be involved right from the beginning of a protocol, starting from the protocol itself and defining the problems, because sometimes researchers are not, particularly if it is going on clinical trials, researchers do not always realize the major problems that patients wrestle with. So they should be involved directly in defining the problems. So patients will be involved in that. And I think in most countries, this happens. In, of course, industry-sponsored trials, I don't think that patients are always directly involved. Sometimes I think they should. Of course, there is again, and that comes down to the question on the health literacy. How well are patients acquainted with the terminology, with the basic background, scientific backgrounds of such a protocol? But we could try. I think there is no reason why also in industry-sponsored trials, patient opinions should at least not be asked. whether they should be directly involved in the statistical development and all the other aspects, complex aspects of a trial, that is open question. But at least in the idea, bringing on the idea to start the trial, and particularly if they go for new technology in dialysis, their patient complaints should certainly be taken into account. So there's no reason why industry trials should not at least contact patient groups to ask their opinion.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, there was a large international virtual conference, the CVCT, usually happening in Washington, D.C. It was the cardiovascular clinical trialists. And there were regulators, industry, the trialists, and there were patients. So actually, they invited a number of patients, mainly from US, because it's their native language. Yeah? Europe is difficult. Okay, Sweden is privileged. You speak a perfect English. So some countries, difficult to bring patients into this, but when the trials are done on a national level, that's pretty good. And the initiative is strong, walking in this direction. So whoever has asked this question, there is now light on the horizon, actually. Next question, can I have the next one? And the question is, what do you think is the biggest barrier to patient-centered care in nephrology? The biggest barrier?
I think there are many barriers, if I can take the initiative. What we see, I don't know if that is your experience or if it's the experience of Dr. Hedman, but the contact, I mean, I am not referring to a classic chronic dialysis patient in chronic hemodialysis in-center. Do you know how many times the nephrologist himself makes rounds in his dialysis center? I heard going from once a month, like in the States, or once every 2 weeks or every week. And this is mostly a contact of a couple of minutes from, how are you, sir? You look well. Thank you very much. See you next month. And the tendency also in the ambulatory contact between a patient ambulatory and the doctor becomes shorter and shorter. And I think the introduction of the computer files has not improved that, has not led to an improvement. When I was still in practice and chief of the renal division, some patients complained to me and said, Professor, I am very happy with the Dr. X and so, but you see, I come in and he looks at his screen and he has the blood pressure taken by the nurse. He goes over the list of my drugs and he says, everything is going well. I think they sit down, and some patients complain about that. The 5 minutes talk from person to person and asking also of the psychological aspects of the disease is a little bit gone. And this was in the old times more the opportunity than it is in the modern times. But that may be my opinion, being an old man and old-fashioned.
And it may, I must say, it may vary from country to country in Europe. Yes. Yeah. And yes. I must send a note of protest in Germany. The patient has the right to get a visit, and the visit is paid. And usually we see the patients every dialysis session. Yeah. Oh, wow. And you cannot go always my doctors over all the data. So from time to time, at least I tell them, and they speak with the patient about daily life. So no, but I understand what you mean. Okay. That's absolutely right. Maybe we hear Dr. Hedman. What do you think about this?
I think it has changed in Sweden. When I had dialysis, but it was 40 years ago. I met the doctor at every dialysis session. And I know that it is not so today. I think they meet the doctor very seldom. And I think also if they should work after a person-centered care routine, I think they should meet the patient in a separate room and have a long talk instead of when the patient's in the bed. I think that change, it's much better for the patient is in under the patient is under, if you maybe understand what I mean. Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay, I think we take one more, or do you have another comment maybe?
No.
No, go ahead, Dr. Hedman.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So,
well, I think I talk about the person-centered care. It could be implemented, and there is now it's an approved European standard for person-centered care, which could help for the implementation of we could be a very big. Very good tool for implementation of person-centered care.
So here we have a typical question from a doctor who is saying how to address patients' non-adherence, despite several attempts of explaining its importance. It may go also, I can extend this question to Dr. Hedman, saying we Germans talk about discipline. Yeah, and going into this question, and is it more luck? You were talking about luck. Should doctors be more tolerate patients' not adherence? Is it not everybody's fate, or should you hammer discipline into everybody? How do you approach this question from the patient side?
About discipline. Well, I don't think that helps with discipline. I think it's much give more information how the medication works and why they should take the medication, so the patient understand it. I think education could be a better tool than discipline.
I think that's perfectly true, Dr. Hartmann, and that comes and closes on to what I said about literacy. I mean, the knowledge that people understand what is going on. And of course, you cannot improve the general education of the general population overnight. But I think we underestimate sometimes the literacy of the patient. There's sometimes the patient says yes, and he doesn't understand a single word of what you are saying. Oh, yeah. So, and that explains also that we should do much more education in nephrology to the general public about the general health, but also about kidney health, yes, so that the general level of literacy is improving. And that will certainly ameliorate the discipline, if you call it discipline, or the adherence and the follow-up of our recommendations.
I think this was a good final word, and I think I thank you for your participation, for your question and answers. Thank you, Norbert. Thank you, Dr. Hedman. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And thank the audience for participation of this webinar number 8. Webinar number 9 is next year on January 14, and we have 2 experienced clinicians, Dr. Kai Lopau and Dr. Marie Evans from the Karolinska Institute, Marie Evans, and they talk about transition clinics. We also call it in some parts of the world low clearance clinic. GFR below 30 towards 20, transitioning into kidney replacement therapy. I think this is the topic of next time with a lot of practical informations for clinicians, and I hope you will enjoy it January 14. So we are coming to the end of the webinar series this year. We had a very interesting 8 so far, and so I will see you. I hope I can see you next year, and I wish you all happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and prosperous New Year 2021. Thank you.